Hey my friend, today we're back with PaleoPulse to dive into the topic. The T-Rex wasn't the largest Cretaceous carnivore. Let's explore it together. Centuries ago, a wise man didn't just say, "If you go into the ocean, you'll croak." Instead, he put it more elegantly. There are old sailors, and there are bold sailors. But there are no old bold sailors. In other words, what you don't see in the water is what you should fear. For many people, this rings absolutely true. The ocean harbors terrifying creatures. The kind that have inspired legends, myths, and nightmares, for as long as humans have ventured onto the waves. But here's what you need to understand. The waters of today, as frightening as they can be, are nothing compared to the oceans and seas of prehistoric times. Specifically, those of the late Cretaceous period, when the waters of Earth saw a parade of ferocious predators that would make a great white shark look like a goldfish. We're talking about dinosaur-eating sharks, fish that could swallow humans whole, giant crocodiles that prowled the open ocean, and of course, the mighty Mosasaurus, which ruled the marine realm during the entire late Cretaceous period, becoming apex predators in nearly every corner of the planet. Music, and of all the Mosasaurs to come and go, the mightiest and largest of them all was Moses itself. This creature isn't just important because it was the largest of its kind. It's also the first mosasaur known to science, with a discovery story that changed our understanding of extinction, evolution, and what kinds of monsters once swam in Earth's ancient seas. By the time we're done, you'll understand why Mosasaurus was arguably the most successful marine predator of the entire Mesozoic era. The Mosasaurus story begins over 260 years ago in the Netherlands. In a limestone quarry near the city of Emrecht, miners were excavating stone when they uncovered something that stopped them cold. A giant skull, massive beyond anything they'd ever seen, embedded in the ancient rock. At first, people thought they'd found a whale. Large skull found in marine deposits. Obviously, a whale, but as more experts examined the specimen, doubts began to creep in. The skull structure was wrong for a whale. The teeth were all wrong. This wasn't a citation at all. So, the next hypothesis emerged. Maybe it was a giant crocodile. After all, crocodiles have similar skull proportions in some ways, and everyone knew crocodiles could get large. This interpretation gained traction for a while, but it too had problems. The more closely scientists looked, the less the skull resembled any known crocodilian. The discovery became a sensation at the time, and not just because of its size. You see, back in the 1700s, it was widely believed that no animal could ever go extinct. The prevailing view was that God had created all species perfectly, and perfectly created things don't just disappear from the earth. So finding this enormous skull of an animal that clearly didn't exist anymore created philosophical and theological problems on top of the scientific confusion. This confusion lasted for over 40 years. 40 years of debate, argument, and classification, until finally during the 1800s, when more specimens began turning up, scientists realized what they were really looking at. This wasn't a whale. It wasn't a crocodile. It was a giant marine lizard, the likes of which had never been seen by modern science. It was also in the 1800s that the holotype was formally described and named. Paleontologists dubbed it Mosasaurus hoffmanni, meaning Hoffman's lizard of the Meuse River. The name honored the Dutch scientist who had helped preserve and study the specimen and referenced the river near where it was found. But even after being properly named and classified, Mosasaurus was still poorly understood. Early artistic reconstructions, music, portrayed it as a semi-aquatic animal that could crawl onto land with functional limbs and claws, looking more like a massive crocodile than the fully marine predator it actually was. It would take another 30 years for this misinterpretation to be cleared up. In 1854, a careful anatomical study pointed out that the fang bones, the finger bones in the flippers, had no indication of muscle or tendon attachments that would be necessary for walking. The conclusion was inescapable. Walking on land would have been impossible for Mosasaurus. This was a fully aquatic creature, as committed to life in the ocean as any dolphin or whale. Throughout the rest of the 1800s and into the early 1900s, developments in understanding Mosasaurus accelerated rapidly. Many new specimens were discovered, including individuals unique enough to be considered separate species within the genus. But these new mosasaurs weren't the only notable discoveries. Other animals similar to Mosasaurus were found as well. Creatures that weren't quite similar enough to be considered new species of Mosasaurus, but were undoubtedly close relatives. The contemporary Tiosaurus, for instance, was clearly a cousin, sharing many characteristics, but distinct enough to warrant its own genus. These finds resulted in the creation of a larger taxonomic grouping, the clay Mosasaur, which includes descendants of the last common ancestor of Mosasaurus, Cleidists, and Plesiosaurus. Within this newly formed family, Mosasaurus sits as one of the most derived and successful members. The Mosasaur family in turn falls under the order Squamata, which includes all snakes and lizards. This means that Mosasaurus, despite being a massive marine predator, was technically a lizard, a 50-foot-long, 15-ton lizard that ruled the oceans, but a lizard nonetheless. However, even though nearly all paleontologists agree that Mosasaurus was a squamp, there's a fierce ongoing debate about its closest living relatives. Some researchers believe the closest modern relatives are monitor lizards, pointing to similarities in skull structure and tooth replacement patterns. Others argue for snakes, citing genetic evidence and certain anatomical features. For now, this conversation continues and the jury is still out. But there's absolutely no debate on one crucial point. Mosasaurus was the largest squamp and the largest mosasaur to ever live. It was a true sea monster in every sense of the term. Let's talk about just how massive Mosasaurus could get, because understanding the scale of this animal is crucial to appreciating what an absolute monster it was across the 5 known species. The average adult Mosasaurus is believed to have measured between 7 and 11 meters, or roughly 23 to 36 feet in length. The species M. lemoneri and M. hoffmanni were the 2 larger representatives, consistently hitting the higher end of this size range at 36 feet. A Mosasaurus would have been twice the length of a typical great white shark and roughly equal in length to a whale shark, the largest fish alive today. But here's where things get really impressive. Thanks to its more robust build compared to sharks, Mosasaurus was far heavier than any fish of comparable length. A 36-foot 11-meter individual would have weighed over 10 tons. Let that sink in for a moment. This marine reptile weighed more than every carnivorous dinosaur that ever lived, including Tyrannosaurus rex and Spinosaurus. It was heavier than a fully loaded dump truck. But mosasaurs didn't stop there. Specimens varied greatly in size, meaning that once in a blue moon, an absolute unit of an individual would appear. The species M. hoffmanni yielded most of these giants. One particularly notable specimen is referred to as the Penza Mosasaurus. This individual's true length remains uncertain due to incomplete remains, but based on its enormous skull, some researchers believe it measured 17.1 meters, or about 56 feet from snout to tail tip. It's widely considered by many paleontologists to be the largest Mosasaurus discovered to date. But here's where things get even more extreme. A lesser-known specimen may actually have the Penza individual beaten. This new contender is known from skull material, specifically a quadrant bone, the bone that connects the lower jaw to the skull. This quadrant is 150% larger than the average Mosasaurus quadrant. Scaling up from this bone gives a hypothetical length of 18 meters, or about 59 feet, and an estimated weight of almost 15 tons. At this size, you're looking at an animal comparable to numerous baleen whales, including exceptionally long sperm whales and humpback whales. And at this maximum size, Mosasaurus wasn't just the biggest carnivore of its own time. It was the largest carnivore of the entire Cretaceous period, marine or terrestrial. This resulted in Mosasaurs being an apex predator in virtually every environment it inhabited. But it wasn't just size that other animals had to worry about. Because Mosasaurus possessed a highly specialized and absolutely deadly weapon: its jaws. The jaw and skull of Mosasaurus were relatively large for its body length, which allowed for a long row of giant teeth. Some of these teeth could measure over 3 in, or 7.6 centimeters in length. These weren't just big teeth, though. They were exquisitely designed killing instruments. Each tooth had 2 opposite cutting edges, creating a blade-like structure perfect for slicing through flesh and bone. The teeth were also highly prismatic, a characteristic known to strengthen durability, improve slicing efficiency through fine serrations, and increase gripping power while clamping down on struggling prey. Mosasaurus was also known to have had an extremely powerful bite in general, as indicated by the construction of its skull. Both the frontal and parietal bones overlapped, creating a rigid cranial structure connected by strong interlocking sutures. This design allowed the skull to resist extreme amounts of compression and force while biting down. Some researchers have estimated the bite force at between 13.000 and 16.000 pounds per square inch. To put that in perspective, that's about 4 times stronger than the bite of a saltwater crocodile, which currently holds the record for strongest bite force among living reptiles. This powerful chomp, coupled with the design of its teeth and its massive size, allowed Mosasaurus to kill virtually anything in its environment. And the diet reflects this capability. Mosasaurus ate bony fish, sharks, seabirds, turtles, and other marine reptiles. Basically, if it swam in the late Cretaceous oceans, it was on the menu. Direct evidence of this predation has been found in the fossil record. One particularly striking example involves an Allopoleron, a type of giant sea turtle. This specimen had deep bite marks scattered across its body and shell that matched the tooth spacing and dimensions of Mosasaurus. The size and depth of these bite marks highlighted the vicious nature of Moses' attacks. But perhaps the most dramatic evidence comes from the stomach contents of a Mosasaurus specimen itself. This particular individual, dated to about 75 million years ago, was found with a 1 meter or 3.3 foot long fish in its gut. But here's the disturbing part. The fish had been completely dismembered during the hunt. Torn apart with such violence that identifiable pieces were scattered throughout the Mosasaurus digestive system on top of direct fossil evidence. Carbon isotope analysis of Mosasaurus bones suggests that not even the biggest animals around were off the menu. The carbon isotope signatures were extremely low, which occurs when an animal has a diet high in large sea turtles and other massive marine reptiles. Mosasaurus wasn't just hunting small, easy prey, it was targeting the giants. But the power of Mosasaurus wasn't the only trait that allowed it to be such a successful hunter. It was also a surprisingly fast swimmer thanks to its massive tail, which played the primary role in locomotion. Scientists speculate that Osa swam by moving this giant tail from side to side in rapid fashion, similar to what we see in certain fast-swimming fish like mackerel. This form of swimming, called carnivorm locomotion, is very efficient and could have granted Mosasaurus a top speed of around 30 miles per hour or 48 kilometers per hour. Now you might be thinking that 30 miles per hour doesn't sound that impressive. But remember, this is a 50 feet long multi-tonne animal moving at highway speeds through water. The momentum generated would be absolutely devastating for any prey animal unlucky enough to be in its path. The flippers also played a vital role in locomotion, though not for propulsion. Instead, they were used to maneuver the large body, functioning as control surfaces that allowed for tight turns and precise positioning. And these flippers were quite powerful for their size thanks to the attachment of large, robust muscles. In fact, the power of these flippers may have been so forceful that they occasionally resulted in injuries during high-speed maneuvers. Many Mosasaurus specimens possess separation injuries on their flippers, where the bones show signs of tearing away from connective tissue. This suggests these animals were pushing their bodies to the absolute limit during hunts. Most paleontologists believe that these incredible speeds were deployed primarily during ambushes, which seems to have been Mosasaurus's main hunting tactic. And speed wasn't the only tool it used when launching these ambushes. The eyes of Mosasaurus were relatively large for its body size and featured sclerotic rings, bony structures that took up much of the eye socket. This anatomy suggests exceptional binocular vision that could be used to single out prey from a distance and judge distances accurately. Crucial skills for an ambush predator. It's clear that Mosasaurus was outfitted with powerful tools and weapons that many unfortunate victims experienced firsthand. But here's something that might surprise you. One animal that wasn't safe from Mosasaurus predation was Mosasaurus itself. Throughout the years, numerous Mosasaurus specimens have been found with extensive damage that's widely believed to have come from intraspecific combat, fights between members of the same species. Some of these battles were particularly brutal. One specimen was found with an entire tooth embedded in its lower jaw right underneath the eye socket. Think about what that means. Another Mosasaurus had bitten down on this individual's face with such force that a tooth broke off and lodged permanently in the bone. Despite how severe this sounds, this particular individual was actually one of the lucky ones. Its skeleton showed signs of healing, meaning it survived the fight. Not all were this fortunate. Another specimen had multiple breaks, lacerations, and punctures on various bones, especially those in the back of the skull and neck area. In this case, there was no healing visible anywhere, indicating that the individual was killed by its attacker. Paleontologists believe that fights between mosasaurs may have looked similar to combat seen in modern crocodiles who grappled their rival's head during attacks, thrashing violently and attempting to drown or crush their opponent. Surprisingly, getting eaten by a fellow Mosasaurus wasn't the only concern with intrapacific combat. Many individuals who survived such battles eventually became hindered or diseased due to their injuries. Most commonly, it seems that wounds sustained during fights led to deep bacterial infections in the bones, causing sepsis, necrosis, and unhealed fractures that would have caused chronic pain and reduced mobility. However, despite these hardships, Mosasaurus was still ultimately one of the most successful animals of the entire Cretaceous period. And that success is reflected in its absolutely enormous geographic range. The distribution of Mosasaurus fossils shows that this animal encompassed much of the globe during the late Cretaceous. Remains indicate it was common throughout the Atlantic Ocean and connecting seaways, most notably the western interior seaway that split North America in half and the Mediterranean Sea that once separated Europe from Africa. Overall, Mosasaurus bones have been found in Canada, throughout Europe, the United States, Turkey, Russia, the Levant region, Argentina, Brazil, the western African coastline, and even Antarctica. This diverse range meant that Mosasaurus was able to adapt to many different climatic zones, including tropical, subtropical, temperate, and even subpolar environments. In all these environments, remains are usually concentrated in areas that align with what would have been coastal waters where the average depth was about 50 meters or 160 feet. However, occasional finds still show that mosasaurs could and would venture into deeper waters when needed, possibly following prey migrations or seeking out different hunting grounds. The large number of coexisting mosasaurs has long been a source of fascination for paleontologists. Many of them were like mosasaurs' apex predators. Some were even comparable in size, though not quite as massive. The largest competitors included Pygeenthedon, Tiosaurus, Music, and the recently discovered Antarctic giant Kai. It's believed, Music, that in order to reduce competition, each species developed its own specialized diet reflected in the unique structures of their teeth. Some had teeth designed for crushing shellfish. Others had teeth optimized for catching fish. Mosasaurus, with its generalist tooth design, could eat almost anything. Yet, combat between mosasaurs was still unavoidable. At times, due to their sheer abundance, territorial disputes and hunting conflicts were inevitable. Evidence of such battles has been preserved in the fossil record. One particularly dramatic case involves an unfortunate smaller mosasaur that was ambushed and rammed by a Tiosaurus, resulting in a fractured skull and likely immediate death. Such battles between giants would have been spectacular and terrifying to witness, and they were possibly quite common during the late Cretaceous when mosasaurs were at the height of their power and in fact were experiencing their highest level of evolutionary radiation of all time. Studies of the extinction event have revealed that the Mosasaurus population was devastated in multiple ways. Food chain collapse was immediate and catastrophic. Music, the impact threw so much debris into the atmosphere that sunlight was blocked for months or even years. Photosynthesis stopped. Phytoplankton died. Small fish that fed on plankton died. Larger fish that fed on small fish died. And at the top of that collapsing food chain, starving and desperate, Music, were the moss. It's believed that for some time, mosasaurs that were out in deep water may have been able to survive the most immediate effects of the Music asteroid impact. The deep ocean would have been less affected by the initial devastation. But eventually, even these survivors succumbed, likely due to starvation, as the marine food chain completely collapsed from the bottom up. So, what are your thoughts on today's topic? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel, PaleoPulse, so you won't miss any of our upcoming posts. Thanks for watching. See you next time.